Here's John Lennox to argue that science is a bigger problem for atheism than for theism.
The mistake that's made, and Richard Dawkins pushed this, is that God and science compete as explanations. So you have to choose between them. And Hawking pushes that even further, and I could never understand that. Why do you offer people a choice? You either believe in God or science, but not both.
I don't know where Hawking said that. You only have to choose between God and science when you deny the findings of science because you don't think they fit your preferred narrative of what God is and what God has done. For example, if you believe in a global flood despite the evidence that pretty conclusively shows that it never could have happened, or if you believe that the universe is only a few thousand years old despite all the evidence to the contrary.
And then it occurred to me that they're making two profound mistakes. The first one is that they've got the wrong concept of God. Now, that didn't strike me for many years. You see, when I was young, which is a very long time ago, and I used the word God in public in Ireland, everybody knew I was talking about the creator God of the Bible, who sustains the universe, but not now.
Sustains the universe? It seems counterintuitive to me that a perfect all-powerful God would create a universe that breaks down if left unattended and needs constant sustenance.
People like Stephen Hawking, when I use the word God, they think of something like a Greek deity or Zeus or something like this. And they automatically assume that you're thinking of a God of the gaps. I can't explain lightning, so I invent a God.
Lennox's argument is essentially, I can't explain the intelligibility of the universe, so it must be God.
When you do some atmospheric physics, that God disappears. And the most important thing to realize, that the God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps. I don't know whether you've ever noticed the first sentence in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't yet understand. No? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that linguistically is a merism. It means everything.
I don't think Lennox has thought that out very thoroughly, because if it literally meant everything, that would include God himself, and I doubt he believes that God created himself.
The bits we do understand, and the bits we don't understand. Now, come back to Newton. Why did he write in the preface to Principia Mathematica, the most famous book in the history of science? I hope this book persuades thinking people to believe in a deity, because the more he understood of how it worked, the more he admired the genius of the God that did it that way. That's the way your mind works. If you studied engineering, you can understand a turbofan jet much better than I can. If you understand art, you can follow the details of a Rembrandt painting better than I can. The more you understand, the more you admire the genius. And that is just so important. So Newton's faith, and my faith indeed in God, increases because the heavens are constantly and increasingly in detail declaring his glory.
Except for when it doesn't. In those cases, it's because of the fall. The fall allows theists to dismiss all counterexamples to the supposed genius of the universe's supposed design.
That's actually the way it works. But then there's the other side, and that is this. The God explanation is not the same as the science explanation. Let me illustrate it very briefly, if I may. Why is the water boiling? Well, because heat energy from the gas burner is being conducted through the base of the kettle, agitating the molecules, and it's boiling. Okay? It's actually boiling because I'm desperate for a cup of tea.
You could give a scientific account of what's going on in your brain to cause you to want a cup of tea. That explanation is not beyond science.
Now you're laughing. Now what does your laughter tell me? You see, it's a false apposition because both explanations are correct.
And neither of them are woo-woo supernatural explanations with no coherence, let alone evidence.
Now, think about that. This is very simple. I find kids can understand it, but many professors cannot. And I'll explain that in a moment. You see, The scientific explanation is telling you how it works. But I have also given a personal explanation in terms of human volition. I want a cup of tea.
I guess Lennox thinks that human volition is, in fact, some kind of woo-woo supernatural phenomenon.
Now think about it. Which is the more important of those two? Well, people have been enjoying tea for thousands of years before they knew about equations of heat. Isn't that so?
I don't know why one physical explanation is more important than the other, or in what sense it's more important.
Those explanations don't conflict. They don't compete. They complement.
And neither of them are analogous to any theistic explanation.
And I sometimes put it to people and say, look, God no more competes with real science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with the basic laws of physics and the law of internal combustion as an explanation for the motor car.
It doesn't compete with science because Henry Ford's psychology can also be studied scientifically. This is a poor analogy.
You need both. And that is such a simple idea. Whether you're a scientist or not, you can point out explanation comes at different levels. But some of these people will explicitly say the why question is not valid. I've heard Dawkins say that publicly.
It's only not valid insofar as you're looking for the motives of an entity whose existence you've yet to establish. It makes no sense to ask what the motivation for the creation of the universe is before you've established that it was created and that creation was the consequence of a motivation.
Well, we do ask it still, and it's a very important question. And I think if we begin to grasp that, it takes the heat out of a lot of things.
Can you repeat that?
About the heat?
You said a little bit ago that the question, has science buried God? No, but science may well bury atheism.
Yes.
Unless you find a way to empirically demonstrate God's existence, I guarantee you it won't.
I want to write a very popular level book about that in general, because just science, from what I know, I'm convinced that if a fair-minded person reads those chapters just in my book, Miracles, they've got to be convinced that the only rational explanation for anything is that there is a God. I'm convinced of it.
It can't be the only rational explanation if it's not a rational explanation at all. Even if there is a God who performs miracles, they seem to be much less common than illusions, delusions, and lies. Even if there is a God, physicalist explanations for purported miracles are still the more plausible ones. Given that this is the case, I don't see how reports of miracles can convince anyone that there's a God. Even if I saw and could confirm that a well-established law of physics had been broken, it would be more plausible that I had discovered some heretofore unknown but nonetheless entirely natural exception to that law than there being some supernatural explanation.
We can't prove it, but when you say...
Well, not in the mathematical sense you can't, but you can prove it in the ordinary sense of giving strong evidence for it.
How do you give strong evidence of a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind?
Okay, but what I meant was obviously not in the mathematical sense, because you're the mathematician. So what I mean is that if you are serious about determining whether there is a God, if anything, it does seem to me that science can either take, the farthest science can take you is to, in the direction of atheism, is I don't know. In other words, pure science can only take you to agnosticism. It can never take you to atheism. It's not possible.
I think that's correct.
I suppose that's true in the sense that science, specifically empirical investigation, also can't prove that married bachelors don't exist. Philosophy, however, can prove that married bachelors don't exist, and can, analogously, also prove that God does not exist. All you have to do is show God to be a self-contradictory concept, just as a married bachelor is.
The very interesting thing, you framed the question, and I ought to attempt to answer it. Why do I think that science can bury atheism? It's because science can be done. That may seem a very simple statement to you, but it is an amazing thing. How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here, and comes up with equations, and they appear to apply to the universe out there. How does that work?
It works because the equations were formulated specifically for that purpose. Asking this question is like asking, we came up with words to describe things, and then the things we're describing match our descriptions of them. How does that work? Math is not some spooky woo-woo phenomenon. It's just a language, and it was invented by people, as all languages are.
Now, Eugen Wigner won the Nobel Prize for Physics, and he talks about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. We don't deserve it. It's a miracle.
No, it isn't. It's effective because we designed it to be effective. There's nothing miraculous about that. And Lennox insists that his God isn't a God of the gaps, but he's using God to explain why math works because he thinks that's a gap that physicalism can't fill.
Well, he's wrong. It's only unreasonable if you start by believing atheism. But if you start by believing that there's a rational intelligence behind the universe, then doing science is reasonable. What am I saying? I'm saying that the Christian has a rationale for doing science, which brings me back to the rise of science. But let me come now to the atheist position, and I am fortunate to have many atheist friends, and I raise these questions with them. And they sometimes say to me, why are you not an atheist? And they expect me to say, because I'm a Christian. I sometimes do say that because it's part of the reason. But if they're scientists, I say, because I'm a scientist. If you'll allow a mathematician to be a scientist. And they say, how is that possible? Well, tell me, I say, what do you do science with?
Well, clearly I do it with my spooky woo-woo immaterial soul because that's more trustworthy than a physical brain for some reason.
And I point up here to make it fairly obvious. And most of them say, well, I do it with my, and they're about to say mind when they realize it's not politically correct to believe in the mind. There's only the brain. That is a common view. You are your brain. So I let that sit for a minute. I say, okay, you do science with your brain. Tell me about your brain with which you do science. What do you really believe about it? Give me a short history of the brain. Oh, they say that's relatively easy because the brain is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And I look at them and I sometimes smile and I say, and do you trust it?
And I say, no, I don't. That's the whole reason why science has to be so rigorous. The whole paradigm revolves around evading the intuitive biases that evolution has programmed into our brains. Even if we ultimately think with our immaterial souls, those souls are still frequently untrustworthy. Even if our souls were created by an intelligent mind, that intelligent mind did not create our souls to be infallible. And we still, therefore, shouldn't trust them. A common rebuttal apologists give anytime you point out any flaw in supposedly intelligently designed humans is to blame that flaw on the fall. However, we're not just epistemically fallible, we're also morally fallible. If we were created morally infallible, we never would have committed the original sin in the first place. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.